I'm Al Alder. Today on Driving.ca, we are out in sunny Arizona at what used to be the Bondurant Racing School. Our car for today is the new Dodge Charger Daytona Scat Pack. This is the hot version, 670 horse, 627 pound-feet of torque. Today, we're going to do a little bit of a track session. I have just been out on the road, though, in this thing, and I gotta say, it is one of the EVs of all time. Dodge has very clearly made an effort here to make this thing not totally boring. But of course, there's a lot more to not totally boring than just throwing power at a problem. Now, to the Dodge Charger's credit, they have done a lot of the first impressions right. This thing doesn't just look like an EV in the way we've sort of grown used to. Instead, it's got a gas car presence when you're out on the street. When you walk up to it, it makes some silly sounds with quite an emphasis, actually. 600 watts worth of juice running through a pair of speakers. Now, they've done a whole bunch of jargon trying to make these things sound like more than just speakers, but they're speakers. And they do make a noise. It's just kind of weird. With that, I think we are about to start giving it a little bit of juice. So, this new Charger at 5,800 pounds is not a lightweight, but as EVs go, that isn't actually terrible. That's with just a hair over 100 kilowatt hours battery capacity, which some 93, 94 are usable. Now, Dodge says that that's going to be good for range figures in around the 400-ish kilometer range, depending on which trim you get. Now, here in the Scat Pack, it's going to be a little bit more limited because you've got a far heavier, meatier, higher output configuration. How do 5,800 pounds feel? Well, we're on twin valve adaptive dampers here in the Scat Pack. And I've got to say, body feels better controlled than I was counting on. This feels modern. With that being said, it feels heavy. Now, we do have more brake than we've had in the past. We actually got a lot of brake. In the case of this here big brake pack, you're actually looking at even bigger brakes than you had even on the Hellcat Red Eyes. Got 6 piston Brembos up front, 4 pistons out back, and a whole lot of rotor in between those. That is good because you are bringing those 5,800 pounds up to speed in 3.3 seconds. Of course, that isn't quite Taycan Turbo S sort of speed. That's not in the 2s. But then again, I don't know that we necessarily want that either. After a production run since my childhood, the LX platform, Charger, and Challenger are finally dead for real, like for real this time. Brampton plant is winding down to retool, and now it's time for a new generation. This is the Windsor, Ontario built Dodge Charger Daytona Scat Pack. This new generation car runs up to 670 horsepower, but it's also all battery electric. So, on behalf of all the muscle fans out there, I've got to ask an important question. Does this new all-electric Charger offer what we want? Well, straight off the bat, it's fast, but then so are a lot of things. This thing will do 100 kilometers an hour in 3.3 seconds. It's not just speed off the line either, although there is very clearly plenty of that. No, this thing is trying to be a whole lot at once, actually. We've got a car that can do drag. We've got a car that can slide and do donuts and all of that silliness. We've got a car that can tour comfortably. In the case of this here spec, we've got adaptive damping that can make things really stiff or really just soft and comfortable, as I've been preferring today. So, we've also got a car, in the case of this trim, that goes for $90,000, though as we're going to get to, there's also one for $59,000. So, I want to say we're not going to talk much at all about the incoming gasoline-powered variant of this. That car is expected to arrive the latter half of next year with the straight 6 high output and standard output Hurricane 3-liter engines that we've tested already in the new generation Ram, and which makes a lot of power, though as we've seen also has some high compression, forced induction issues still to be worked out. In the case of this here battery electric though, we've got a pair of 250 kilowatt motors. We've got a battery underneath that's just over 100 kilowatt hours gross, or some 94 kilowatt hours usable capacity. Charged up from 5 to 80% in optimal conditions on a 350 kilowatt charger, though this thing can only actually receive 183 kilowatts. That will supposedly give you that 80% charge in as few as 33 minutes. That's reasonably quick. That's actually better than you're going to see out of the Ford electric architectures, although that still doesn't come close to the crazy numbers we've gotten used to seeing in the 800 volt Hyundai Ioniq 5s and those eGMP cars, or indeed the Porsche Audi PPV platform, which again at 800 volts can do some really crazy speeds up to 330 kilowatts. What those other cars don't have though is the sound that this car produces. Dodge is well aware of its customer base and that its customer base wants a big growly brrr kind of car, and this isn't quite that, but they do make a really solid step in that direction. This new Charger uses a lot of really funny marketing speak to basically tell you that it's got a pair of big speakers that echo through a big amplifier chamber underneath, and in the process deliver as many decibels as you'd be used to out of a Hellcat, 126 decibels to be precise. Switching the thing on, you get a whole cold start sort of sequence. It makes a big noise if you're sitting outside. It isn't quite as depth or wide ranging as you might like, and I mean that in the sense of frequency range. You get a lot of mid-tones through this, and when the car is driving past you, it sounds rather car-like. It doesn't sound like an electric appliance. At that startup where everything needs to be really exaggerated both in the high and low bassy ends, there's something missing though. It's got a bit of a hollowness, kind of like a Disney World animatronic. It's not quite spooky like Five Nights at Freddy's, it's just removed, a little detached. Get it out on track, and the sound pumped into the car is plentiful though. It's electric power steering, which we've gotten used to, and honestly doesn't feel all that far off from what we had in the Chargers. However, those previous Charger steering racks didn't really feel all that great either. There's a very significant sort of video gamey detachment here. Now, I will say to its credit that taken out on the circuit, it does give you a little bit more feedback in some ways than the Hyundai Ioniq 5N, which I've also had on track. The 5N is a fun and impressive car, and I think really the best effort we've seen yet, the most earnest, certainly, at actually engaging enthusiast desires in an electric car. This is a different take on that. It's clearly trying to do its best to bring us something that is somewhat interesting, but it doesn't have quite the same range or breadth of gimmicks and fun and familiar reference points that we get in the Ioniq 5N. The i5N has a whole buttload of features and options that you can switch around to configure to your tastes, so you can get just the little bit here or the little bit there of the kind of driving experience you really lust for. This here, well, I mean, it does EV things, and that is to say it drives like an EV. Now, of course, not all EVs drive the same, but in many ways they do. These cars are all very hefty. This one here, some 5,800 pounds depending on how you spec it. With that kind of weight, you generally have to have reasonably stiff springs to actually support it all, but generally reasonably soft damping that allows it to steady itself out. These things have tended to be a little bit mushier, and yes, we've seen in, for instance, the Porsche Taycan that low-profile tires and so on can definitely start to tighten it up, but then the Taycan is a little bit lighter. Indeed, it only weighs as much as the equivalent Panamera does. The suspension setup in this then, whether it's in soft mode or hard mode on these dual valve dampers on this here Scat Pack, or as in the RT that I drove earlier, just generally soft, sort of mid-balanced, enjoyable. Either way, you get a bit of a softer setup. It's not quite so soft on the spring rates that you get a lot of body motion. You do certainly get some noticeable weight transfer, which is really helpful on the track and feels a little more connected than some other cars will. And it's soft enough that it can really effectively, it seems, keep all four wheels on the ground and gripping quite well. On the track, the softness is nice because it leaves the wheels hanging down where they can actually stay firmly in contact with the ground. You feel a lot of mechanical grip in these, and on these BF Eagle F1s, I've been really rather surprised by how grippy this feels. Now, you feel that mass, don't get me wrong, and you definitely do have to brake with that in mind. Now, braking in this is pretty impressive. You're looking at 6-piston Brembos up front, 4 pistons out back. That's with the big brake setup in this here track pack equipped Scat Pack. You do not get those giant brakes in the RT. With that said, the RT also isn't managing the same 670 horsepower, 627 pound-feet of torque. Instead, that regular RT is sold from some $30,000 less than this here Scat Pack. For those savings, you do lose some power. That being said, it's still plenty of power. 496 horsepower, 404 foot-pounds. That is plenty, even in a 5,800 pound car. Now, what I will say either way is that it doesn't necessarily feel fast in the way that I'm sort of used to now from EVs. That RT posts acceleration times of 4.7 seconds, and this here Scat Pack, as I mentioned, does 3.3 in optimal conditions. When you plant your foot, it's not quite that same neck-snapping Tycon acceleration that we've gotten used to in some EVs now. In a way, this is kinda nice, because as I've railed about constantly, fast isn't necessarily fun, and honestly, just breakneck acceleration gets old pretty quickly. With that being said, power figures in the 6s, well, you kind of expect something gnarly. And if it's not outright speed, there should be some theater to it. I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time in the old Hellcats, both Charger and Challenger, and those things are a buttload of fun. They're so friggin' dumb. I love and miss them so very much. This, I mean, technically is accelerating. That was highway speed right there. But I mean, it doesn't feel it. Now, part of that is the softness and comfort in this, which Chrysler has done a really good job with. I am shocked by how pleasant this is. Part of that is going to be thanks to the longer wheelbase. This thing now actually has 4 inches more legroom than even the old Challenger did. It's a big car that doesn't necessarily feel big, but absolutely rides with the benefits of that long, steady wheelbase. Combined with the forgiving suspension setup, this is absolutely a dailyable car in either trim. Not only is it a comfortable ride, but Chrysler has really been on the ups with its color, material, and finishes work. We've seen in the Rams in particular that they're starting to get in on Genesis sort of territory. Just really, really pleasant cabins to be in, and with really interesting designs. This cabin here, well, it supposedly makes reference to the 68 to 70 Chargers. Honestly, you really have to look and charitably at that to actually start to see those influences. With that said, it's just a more modern place to be than the old LX cars, and I think in a positive way. It's a very smooth, very clean, very refined cabin. It feels very mature, if contemporary. This is absolutely the sort of update that this long-running series needed, and while I am sad to have lost the traditional actual physical gauges through the wheel there, this large 16-inch display in this top model is a really well-done cluster, as digitals go. In the center, we've got a standard 12.3-inch, regardless of which version you get. Now, infotainment through that is Uconnect 5, which we're all pretty used to now, and works reasonably well, except for things like performance pages, which, as ever, can be a little bit slow to load in sometimes. Compared to the new system in the Jeeps, this system actually feels kind of dated already and is sometimes a bit slower too. It's funny because that Jeep is already on the market, and this as an electric product is meant to be the new gen, the future of the brand. But so it goes, product development cycles are what they are. Now, how would I take this car? Well, personally, I don't think I would. If I wanted a sports car, even if I were a muscle car person, I think I still ultimately, if I had a head on my shoulders, would look toward the Hyundai Ioniq 5N. No, that isn't a big beefy muscle car, but it does its bit really, really well. This, while I concede that Dodge has done a good job of not making it feel like a boring EV, has instead just sort of made it feel like a boring normal car that doesn't do an EV gimmick all the time. And that isn't the most inspiring, unfortunately. So, were I looking at Chargers, where would I put my money? Well, it's hard to say here. This here Scat Pack is some 50% more money than that RT model. And, I mean, yes, for more power and more options and more drive modes and so on and so forth. Note, by the way, that you don't get the drift mode or the track mode or some of that craziness in the regular RT. But that being said, you do get most of the rest of it. And in particular, that really steady ride and still ample power. If you really want to go full dickhead, yes, this thing will let you do that. Four-wheel drive isn't going to let you quite do the same burnouts with the same ease as you could before, especially when you had line lock and all that other silliness, but they've done a good job within what rules they thought they were going to have to adhere to. I think that as time goes on and we finally see this rollback of the EV mandates, this is going to be probably a somewhat irrelevant model. The saving grace there being that they have designed this platform to be able to accept an ICE, that is gas-powered engine as well. So were it my money, I would actually be holding out for that upcoming straight 6-power. My guess is that even the standard output will feel plenty, and if it rides anything like this, it should be a pretty nice way about town. If you really want to go meaty though, that high output, well, it's not going to be a supercharged Hellcat V8. But in this modern era, you know what? We'll take what we can. All considered, as I make my way back to the track, there's a lot to respect here, and it's clear that there is a lot of heart that's gone into it. People clearly want this car to be good, and as they've emphasized, this is the same crew that brought us the Hellcats and all of those, even the people who brought us the Vipers. With that said, there's something missing here, and what's really unfortunate about that is that there didn't have to be. I think Dodge's great miscalculation with this is that they've tried to make this a muscle car that follows in the lineage of all the muscle cars that we've known and loved all through the years. That's fine and dandy if you can execute exactly on the muscle car vibe, but unsurprisingly, that's a tough one to match. Gimmicks like that cold start sound when you turn the thing on would be cool if they were executed right on the mark, and especially if they had that full frequency range. But unfortunately, they don't. And when you're trying to be something and don't deliver on that, that is more disappointing to an enthusiast than if you just let it be a blank slate and had fun with it in whatever form it became. This shouldn't have tried to be a Charger Hellcat. This should have just tried to be a performance electric that can go fast in whatever flavor a performance electric is gonna go fast. It rings a little of Porsche disappointment, and as someone who has spent so much time moaning about those Porsches, how they've fallen antiseptic even though they still push the mythology of the glory years past, well, this is one that kind of stings. I really wish this thing made me feel more. For Driving.ca, I'm Al Alder. For more muscle car or whatever this is, reviews, news, preview specs, tests, all the rest, be sure to follow us online on Driving.ca.